Chapter 2. Terg. At this particular time of the year, at this latitude of Arison, the sun was setting just slightly north of west. It took the planet 482 days to orbit its local star, and it was just over 3/4 of the way round. The yellow star was casting its last long rays across the expansive waters, turning the scattered clouds fiery reds and oranges. The deep blue oceans mirrored the image and reflected the colours in the fading light. Terg stirred in his cot. His body clock informing him it was time to go. Curse his body clock. Had it forgotten he'd been up half his sleep time? The dreams had been so vivid this time that they had woken him several times with a gasp. The indiscriminate destruction he was causing with his new command sickened him to his soul. It was beyond imagining to believe he could open fire on friendly forces as these visions displayed. He rolled over, stretched his long arms above his head, arched his back, pushed his long slender toes away in a long yawn. He sighed. He didn't feel well rested at all. "Are you okay, sir?" "Here, have some of this," soothed a soft voice. It was rhetorical, as the cabin-sized accommodation knew exactly how he felt, and two small medics appeared from a sphincter in the far wall. They swam briskly over to him. The smaller of the two darted toward his mouth that he had just shut, swallowing away his slumber. It bumped into his lips and burrowed between them, bumping into his teeth. Its frantic tail pushed it along his clenched dentures, looking for a gap. "Hang on," he groaned through his shut mouth. Suddenly an odour appeared in the fluid in front of his nostrils, and as he drew it in, it prompted a sneeze. Instantly the little medic darted into his involuntarily opened mouth. Terg chased it round his mouth with his tongue, but the effort was futile, and no sooner had he recovered from the sneeze than the little medic disappeared down his throat. He shook his head disapprovingly. The other medic gently kissed the back of his neck, and his discomfort started to melt away. "Sir, I've sent a dispatch to Bellafina. You're a report to sick bay as soon as you're bored." He decided it was time to get moving. He pushed off with his hands and gave two quick small kicks of his webbed feet and glided over to the grooming station. As he entered the large vertical pipe, the water within started flowing gently. "Warmer, please," he breathed quietly. "And faster." The current increased in velocity and temperature, and Terg soaked it up with pleasure. "Do you think you could manage something to eat?" He indicated a negative as he recalled the slaughter he had wreaked in his nightmares. For 3 weeks now he had been troubled by these hauntings. The living consciousness of all the areas he frequented assured him the dreams meant nothing, and that he was fit and healthy. He didn't feel it at the moment. The boost the two medics had provided was synthetic, and his lethargy needed a good peaceful sleep, not the weird tingle he could feel behind the growing potions enforced on him by his host. He finished up in the grooming station, grabbed his utility belt, thanked the room for its hospitality, and departed onto a plateau atop a huge mountain range that reached the entire length of the planet, north to south. The avenue here bustled with activity as the inhabitants went about their affairs. Some were drifting along with the current, others darting with such pace it was difficult to count their numbers. The faster traffic always moved closer to the surface, and Terg tried counting the individual travellers. Looking up through the 100 metres or so of water above him, coloured orange in the dusk, he smiled. The lack of pressure made him feel light. He hadn't been in shallow water for such a long time. Nearly a third of the planet was in 200 metres of water, and not one mountain peak breached the surface. The tilt of the planet was slight, so there was barely seasonal change. That is not to say that the weather was slight, or always sedate. The bubbling broth of gas that surrounded the planet was mixed and tossed and turned by many factors. Mountains of air as high as the rock mountains below the surface roamed across the planet, creating a vast variety of weather patterns. 2 moons pulled on the water as they circled above. The resultant ocean currents added their pulse into some very violent storms that screamed across the endless oceans. However, that was not here or now. At this time of the year, in this patch of the ocean, the weather was calm. Below the surface of the watery world, the city of Hool lay before Terg and began to light up with the approach of night. Its 11,000 odd square kilometres sprawled across the plateau and down the side of a massive submerged mountain in the lower southern hemisphere. If it weren't for the ocean currents flowing year-round from the equator bringing warm water, this would have been a lot colder place. Also because of these meeting of warm currents from the equator and cold currents dragged up from the depths at the poles, the city of Hool and its surrounding areas were renowned for its prolific sea life, and the quality of its produce. It was a tourist spot, thanks also to its dramatic scenery, and many a summer holiday was spent here. The plateau of the mountain was 100 metres or so below the surface of the ocean and contained a third of the greater metropolitan area. In the shallow blue waters atop the expansive plateau, all sorts of growths and constructions sprawled across the rolling plains. Between these dwellings and businesses moved thousands of Aquinos and their creatures, going about their affairs as the evening deepened. The turmoil of clicks and whistles as the inhabitants conversed filled the waters around the city and became part of the ambient ocean noise across half the planet. Terg turned into the steady flow and casually started swimming towards the central business district that hung at the edge of the plateau. He smiled in appreciation as he moved between the many beautiful structures that made up this part of the fabulous city of Hull. This was the Aquinas capital, and they were mighty proud of it. Back in the day when they were royals, this was where they chose to live. Many names in the city still had royal inflections. The Princess Highway ran straight through the centre of the city and continued thousands of kilometres into the hinterland sections of the wonderful state of Sopio. By the time Terg had made it to the edge of the submerged mountain, his appetite had awakened, and he stopped at an eatery for some squid and kelp. As he smacked his lips, he noted that the food here was particularly flavoursome. He was a visitor Hull, and he was suitably impressed. Off the plateau, on the side of the mountain, in the deepest part of the city, one could find the royal docks, and this was his destination. The glorious yellow sun that warmed Arison did not reach into these depths. Instead, this part of the city was lit by bacterial growth. The most abundant organism on Arison was bacteria. These bacteria cannot survive in bright sunlight and grow where its rays start to fade, below a couple of 100 metres or so. Vast fields rise to the shallows as the planet turns away from the sun, and darkness falls across the restless seas. The majority of the Aquinas military forces were grown here in Hull, at the Royal Docks, and very recently a new addition to the fleet had arrived, and it was keen to get underway. The cruiser's deep blue bulk sat majestically in the Royal Docks of Hull. Commander Terg gazed at the galactic carrier with wonder. The size of the Quadrant-class ships had always astounded him, but the size of the Sopio United Republic forces Bellafina dwarfed even those carriers. The Surf Bellafina was the first of its class and type, and the honour of commanding her had fallen on Commander Terg. After 6 months of sea trials, it was ready for its maiden mission. The Bellafina was not tethered to the wharf. Not all vessels from Arison needed to be. As Commander Terg watched, the Bellafina gently swam on the spot, holding a stationary position in the mild current. No other craft could match the creatures grown by the inhabitants of Arison. These creatures contained a crew that inhabited it. Several smaller and unoccupied service creatures swam around, making final inspections prior to departure. The creature was much more than a machine could ever be, and was capable of so much more. Terg had yet to push her to her max. At Mach 2.5 in water, the Surf Bellafina was the fastest underwater creature by nearly the speed of sound. Once in space, she was pretty damn near impossible to catch. All 209,000 tons of her could manoeuvre with such agility and disappear in a wink. Not only was she capable of faster than light travel, but she could also bend space. The Aquinas were the only species in the galaxy who had mastered space bending, but even that had its limits. Thus far, the Aquinas scientists could only bend space within 60,000 light-years of galactic centre. Only the massive black hole in the centre could offer enough power for space bending. Still, no other species could travel around the galaxy in the blink of an eye. Many had obtained faster than light speeds. Many more could space travel at sublight speed. Many more had not yet managed to escape their planet's gravity well. Terg had a basic knowledge of the propulsion systems, but the nitty-gritty of bending space was a field for experts, just like the Aquinas scientists who worked on such matters. Special service units had to be grown that could keep up with the Bellafina. Terg looked up and down, scrutinising sensor arrays and weapon outputs, as he leisurely swam to the ranking officer's entrance just aft of the horizontal stabilisers. He knew that he was the last aboard of nearly 500 officers needed to run this 740-metre mini-mobile city. These officers in turn had made sure that after 2 weeks recreational leave for the 6,000 or so crew, that everything was ready. All Commander Terg had to do was give the command for departure of the Bellafina's first real mission. He reached the officer's boarding port, presented his eye, blinked both lids, put his web palm at the appropriate sensor, and the portal opened, admitting him. He was allowed access to an area large enough to accommodate his 300-odd kilogram mass. His flanks filled the recess with a golden glow as his dominance radiated from him. "Bridge!" he commanded to the surrounds. Instantly a portal opened in front of him as he exited onto the bridge. Everyone was already floating to attention, and they threw their left webbed hands onto their right shoulders in the customary Aquila salute.
Aye, Commander!
They all chorused. Terg returned the salute, and his golden radiance increased markedly.
Aye, he replied,
as a blaster erupted somewhere on the bridge. Terg saw the shaft of energy approaching, and with lightning-fast movements dodged as he drew his blaster and returned a single shot, as had all the bridge crew at the assailant, who was now mostly bite-sized pieces and blue liquid.
The bolt had nicked Terg's arm, and blue blood oozed from it and mixed with the surrounding fluid. Small tubes and many little slimy swimming creatures appeared from the surrounding walls and darted like hungry fish at the remains of the dead assailant. Like piranha they swarmed until every atom of the Achilles was gone. The tubes and little creatures disappeared into their recesses, and the remains of the assailant were soon regurgitated into the medical facility. In situations like this, it was unnecessary for Terg to issue orders. Belle, as this highly advanced creature had affectionately become to be called, knew what her commander needed and responded intuitively. A small creature appeared at Terg's weeping wound and began moving along the cut, gently kissing the damaged tissue. The wound healed as the medic worked. In no time the little medic had done its job, and not even a scar remained on the commander's arm. Terg sat down in the boss's chair. Everyone was staring at him. A female voice started talking, audible only to him. The same voice could be heard talking throughout the entire creature as she conversed privately with staff about their relevant duties, but at this moment on the bridge, everyone was silent. She said to Terg, "You were supposed to report to medical, sir." "Anyway, that was Ensign Grigg." Terg looked in silence from each stunned crew member to the next. Bell went on. "He spent his 2 weeks leave period with his brother-in-law in the Lexington Mountain hunting ooglas." Terg gestured upward with his first finger, and Bell paused. Two thoughts came to Terg's mind. Firstly, as soon as Bell mentioned ooglas, and due to the current outstanding situation, the age-old saying popped into his head. "You don't poke a stick in an oogla's butt," was the saying, and for good reason too. If you got close enough and did, you'd probably die. They were nasty critters, fast as, fully equipped with toxic spikes, tail stingers, and venomous bites. Someone sure had poked a stick in an oogla's butt, he frowned. His stomach gurgled. He needed a drink. "Bell, can I have a serve of your nice hot char?" And a pear-shaped glowing bulbous mass materialised in his chair's drink holder. "Thanks," he said. "You're welcome," Bell continued as Terg lowered his pointing finger. "Autopsy shows this Ochinus's genetic structure has been interfered with. I've sent a dispatch to Grigg's relatives asking for input into his activities recently." Bell paused briefly, allowing her commander a moment to think or interrupt. His command crew was still staring at him. Moments ago, the entire bridge crew had acted. They had all been trained for situations such as just transpired, but they couldn't comprehend it. He looked at each of his bridge crew as they stared back at him in disbelief. He raised his finger again for Bell to pause. "Carry on," he pipped. The bridge crew were snapped out of their confusion instantly and set about their assigned duties, albeit not so efficiently. Their job was to look after Bell. His job was to worry about murder. Murder was a new activity on Harrison. The events in Frigid Square at the border post were only just unfolding, so he was unaware of those murders. Terg sipped his char. "Just like Mum's." "But why?" Terg mused more to himself. He smiled as Bell responded. She was just like Mum to all 6,700 crew. He recounted 6,699, now with Grigg dead. "I'm currently working on that, and with current data, we'll have calculated a response in 1,856 days. Terg laughed. His question was to himself, and was completely rhetorical. What amazed Terg was Bell's absolute confidence that she could answer the question. Sopia and Selena had not been openly at war for more than 15 million years. The Achilles and Pep scientists over the eons had seen many a planet destroy itself with war, and even though they really didn't care for each other, violence is normally restricted to areas like the Strip in Jamesvarg and the desert region within Fengid on the other side of Arison. These were the only two areas where Peps and Achilles mixed socially.
However, if the situation arose, Peps and Aquinas would become single-minded about Arison without hesitation against any foreign threat, and there had only ever been one species that had ever found Arison. That event later became known as the Deutschland Affair, and it affected many and led to some drastic changes on Arison. The time for departure arrived, and without celebration, with just 2 words, the surf Bellafina gave a small flick of its tail, and its first mission started. "Let's go," was Terg's command, as he puzzled over the last 5 minutes, sipping at Bell's delicious cha. He wasn't going to medical, not just yet.